all said yes to this.
That's good.
Councilmen came
That's
down
not
and
bad
said
to
yes
see.
to this, and I'm
Sure.
like,
It's good to see
okay,
kids
first
out.
of all, this was brought to us 3 weeks ago.
I want to talk about service
Yeah.
masters.
And she goes, well, all the councilmen wives and the councilmen were
They were
all
out
for
doing
it.
truck today.
soups,
And I
oh,
go,
was so excited on and on.
I'm not gonna call her a liar, so I just go, I wasn't there, so I can't. And I go, what? So I said, contact him.
That was my problem in law school.
That's okay.
Her thoughts. That's why I wasn't valedictorian.
But she
However,
wasn't getting,
it does-
I'm the
Highlight
clerk,
different
I
colors
can't
now.
do anything
Some of the
anyway.
girls would do that.
And she just kept
my in-laws
Probably.
was like,
yelling at me.
Yeah.
how do you even look at your book?
Yeah.
We'll talk after.
Okay.
I think they were just wanting the color.
I'm not putting up with people yelling at me no more.
Different colors.
Except Steve, you can yell
Like
at
the
me.
first time I agreed to one thing, and then the second time I agreed to another.
All right.
But I drove to hospital.
I always book brief my cases. I was like, right when I was reading there. Then the professor would call me, cold call. David Williams trying to read on
Oh,
the matchbook.
that's cheating.
Yeah, I should have done that. But you never know what they're gonna ask.
Got it. Thanks.
And I get another flag.
I like it.
Got it.
I know.
Much more substantive.
Oh, I loved it. Loved first grade.
Yes.
I didn't like
Okay,
it.
thank you.
Yeah, I can't have it again.
We'll be getting underway in 25 seconds.
You got a thing to read? Right.
What?
You got a thing to read?
Like expenditures?
Yeah.
Well, I think I want to
He
do a little
knows-
bit more specific.
He knows my language.
Yeah, I know. Okay. The hand gesture.
Guess what I got in my purse? A little
5,
card.
4. Good evening and welcome to the Defiance City Council meeting for tonight, March 23rd, 2021. Before we get underway, let's bow our heads in prayer. Heavenly Father, as we gather, Lord, help us deal kindly and in truth. Help us deal and work with each other with a sense of wanting to do what's best for the people of Defiance. Please give us wisdom and guide us so that our words and our actions and our attitudes build each other up and glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Let the record show that all members of council are present. Would you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I've reviewed the index minutes for the City Council meeting for March 9th, 2021. Does anyone have a motion to amend or correct the index minutes as written? If there are none, I will approve them. Do we have a request for a liaison meeting or a liaison meeting report? Do we have any comments from council? Mr. Hancock.
Yes, there's been some discussion and questions on when the demolition for the Clinton buildings will be planned. Do you have any updates on when that may start?
I don't have exact dates for you, Mr. Hancock. I can tell you that I have been in contact with Mr. Spees from Maumee Valley, but actually I can find out and pass those dates along.
Okay.
I can't give you a date. It's going to be very soon.
I see that they had some boards on some of the windows, but not all of them. So I'm assuming-
Those boards were due to some vandalism that took place.
Okay.
So
Okay,
I'll try to get you a date.
thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Any other comments from council? Mrs. Crutch?
Yeah, I just want to tell the council to maybe stop up to the DDVB office. The mural is finished now that's inside. There's still a couple of things that has to be done, but Sam Myers, who is a graduate from Tenora, I do believe, that she is the one that designed it. And a lot of people helped paint it, but it's pretty cool, so hopefully you can check that out. Have some art.
Beg pardon?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from council? All right. You said you sent me something.
The mayor too. We have to.
Okay. The mayor said that last week Melinda, Rob Sarrigan, and he attended a presentation by a CAD class at DHS. The class was led by Tom Muchler in conjunction with Melinda, Nikki's, and Rob's leadership that they've developed conceptual drawings for improvements of the two roundabouts in green space out near the school campus. They would like to come to our next city council and share with council that information sometime. It would take about 45 minutes. The question is this something the council would like to entertain or have present?
I would like to have them come. I think it would be great to have them come and show us.
I
the
concur.
roundabout.
You concur? Mr.
I think
Rusty?
it's a good idea.
Think it's a good idea? Essentially want to show the presentation that they had for the designs for the roundabouts. And the green space near the school.
It would be in person, that's really the question.
Yeah, in
is they wanna
person.
do it in person.
And it would be an in-person presentation.
Go ahead with it.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Good? 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 Sound good?
I'll get with the mayor and see when Melinda and everybody's available,
All right.
and I'll let you know.
Okay. Sounds good to me. There's nothing on my share of this today. Mayor McCann is out of town at the moment, and so I'll take up the heavy duty of reading from The Future of Defiance by Mrs. Houck's elementary class. Last time we read from this, a student wanted to be a phlebotomist. This time by Linda, says, I want to be a patent registration clerk. Right. It's important, and I will be really responsible. A registration clerk is a cool job. You have lunch breaks. You have a lot of paperwork, but I like writing. You get to use a computer and help people. Well, very good, Linda, you're correct. And that again is this week's reading from The Future of Defiance by Mrs. Houck's class. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got a couple things. First of all, a couple of expenditures of money that council needs to be aware of. We are making an expenditure of money for to Jones and Henry for engineering compliance with our water plant. That amount is $18,900. And then we have another expenditure of money to Railcom. It is for a Dodge vehicle through the police department that we have to equip it with. That amount is $19,336. The other thing that I'd like to at least make council aware of, because Mr. Waxler, you brought up an issue about the ped crossing out at the dog park and the reservoir site. I don't know if you've seen Board of Control minutes. We kind of kicked it around, and I'm not necessarily in favor of that. And I think once you start to stripe something, you're talking about curb cuts, you're talking about sidewalks that would have to be installed as well. Not that that shouldn't be done. I think you want to give equal access under ADA compliance. But at this point, I'm not sure that when you start to stripe it and hash mark it, that people actually follow it and cross at that point. I do understand your concern in terms of the traffic, and the traffic can come pretty fast. I mean, it's you know, it might be a speed limit of 35, but we know certainly from Canal Road that traffic pattern on Canal is much faster than that, especially with some of the trucks. We've had some beacons out at on Canal that have been problematic, that we've had close calls out there. So I don't think we're going to take steps at this time unless council wishes that we move forward on it. But I'm not sure it's going to be effective. I've had conversations with the city engineer about it, and I think we were kind of split on it in Board of Control, to be honest with you.
Well, first of all, I think you're wrong that you don't consider it a big safety issue.
Well, I didn't say I didn't consider it a big safety
Well, you don't do anything
issue.
about it, so that's like pretty much not considering it a safety issue.
No, I didn't say that.
I didn't say striping or anything. I said just put signs up, let people know that people are crossing there is all I really wanted, something like that.
You want a sign like
Pedestrian
a
crossing or something like that. Just let people know that there are people walking across the road there.
Well, signage is something that can be done.
Right.
How effective it might be, that is another question. But if you're talking signage alone by itself,
I wasn't planning on putting sidewalks and all that there.
no, I know you weren't.
Because they don't do it every day. It's, you know, like once in a while you see it out there, you know, but
No,
I
I
still
know.
think we need to make people aware that there are people parking in the dog parking crossing that street with kids.
I agree.
So I don't.
But I'm afraid, and you want them to cross at a certain place. And I don't think there's a path on the other side, but there's no sidewalks on the dog park side. And if signage is the only thing that you're interested in, then I'll revisit it, and that can I'll talk to our street guy and see what kind of signage we have for pedestrian signs that might alert the public to that, or the driver to that.
Yeah, I
But
just
there may
think
be a
we-
challenge, I mean, based on the way ODOT regulations are and everything else, to put up a sign probably means you do have to stripe it.
Well,
you
if you
stripe
put
it,
up a
probably
certain
do have
sign-
to put in the curb cuts, then you have to put in the ADA bumps and all that. So if it were as simple as putting up two signs to say deer crossing or pedestrian crossing, but I think you open a can of worms, which is what I believe Melinda's point was. And then
I
you
think-
get into some cost and,
I think you're right.
but certainly we're seeing whether just putting signs up, but I'm skeptical that we could get away with just that.
Right.
Mr. Resty?
All I know is you got parking there and people are gonna park there across the road there. So,
Okay, Mr. Resty?
That brings up a point. Is the issue crossing or is it parking? Do we need to expand the parking spots so that people can park in by the reservoir instead of having to park across the street and then cross?
I don't know that I've ever had anybody look at that and study that. Certainly you can park in the dog park area and cross the street to go walk up the reservoir
But then it goes
site.
into what the,
Yeah, you don't have that many slots open
on the reservoir
on
side?
the reservoir. You do have some on the west end where the boat ramps are, and you have parking there, and we've created parking elsewhere in that area.
I know when I've driven by there, like in the evening, there has been quite a few people that are taking up walking the reservoir, and there are a lot of cars in that area. So again, is a question of crossing the street, or else is it the question of do we need to look at maybe adding some additional parking so that people don't have to cross? Just a thought.
The other issue was that, and you may recall, I forget which one, it might have been you, Joe, I forget who talked about it maybe a year or so ago, when the bridge was out and we had people trying to cross East Second way out by Kroger's, and
Yeah,
maybe there was some talk of having some islands or something there. And, you know, the traffic on East Second is much heavier than what you've got out by the reservoir. And the volume of traffic, I think, at least in the engineer's eyes, was also problematic. It just didn't justify, it didn't warrant that kind of a pedestrian control device. I mean, most of the time you're making that cross, there's not a car in sight coming in either direction.
Usually, and when he talks about warrants, there's like 8 different criteria that a site might have to meet. I can follow up with her. I suspect that John's right about, if you're gonna put pedestrian crossing signs up or whatever kind of sign, it may be due to the uniform traffic code that now you have to hashtag it, hash mark it, and then add ramps and sidewalks. But I'll find out.
Mr. Mast?
I think people need to be made aware too of that additional parking on the west side. I think that's something that should be pointed out to a greater detail so people understand, but also this entire area obviously is rife for continual improvement, and I think a lot of this stuff can be worked in there.
I think we're going to be doing we're gonna be asphalting the
Paving
parking.
of those lots is
So we'll be, the parking
right
on the,
next on the priority list. If it's not, I don't think we budgeted this year, but
right.
it was close.
So paving the parking on the west end there, something that we're going to do. But again, I think maybe we need to look at signage out there just to make people aware.
If you're gonna make that parking lot paved, you know, there's gonna be a lot more people parking in it. You're gonna create a lot more parking there for that reservoir. You know, and we want people out there, that's where we put all the money into it for, the walking trail and everything else. So we gotta make it safe for them to cross the road. Yeah. You know, it's like putting a playground there and say, hey, kids, there it is, but don't go across the road, you know?
Well, again, there are plenty of sites in this town that we could look at to do just that, because you have those issues elsewhere. So, like I said, I'll take a look at the signage, and if it's something that we can do that's inexpensive, we'll do it. But again, you also, if you really wanna drill down on this, you can do studies. You can do safety studies, you can do traffic studies, and then you'll see if it's warranted or not. That's the criteria that normally is used in those kind of situations. I don't disagree with you that it could be a safety issue.
I don't know, I just tell you what I see, you know, so.
And I can tell you that I've got some concerns on Canal Road where those beacon lights are and traffic going pretty fast, and sometimes at the right time of the day, traffic and the drivers don't follow that as well, and that's dangerous.
Mr. Esty?
What is the speed on Canal? Is that 45? In front of
Not sure. I would guess it to be 45, only because you're not within a residential area and you're headed out of town.
That is pretty fast going around.
I think it lowers once
It's
you get.
lowered, 35
Well, because you're
coming
going-
in. We're on the curve, it's 35. As far as going out, it's,
When you're on the curve,
yes, when you're coming in from the west heading east or north, it's 35 starting just before the curve. Before Jackson, or is it
So
Jackson?
you're telling me you got.
No,
out there.
yeah, I'm talking about from Jackson all the way out to going south.
It's not posted.
35. A cop told me it was 35.
But I don't believe there's any posting out there of the speed limit.
I'll find out for sure. I would say once you get past the residential neighborhood, that it definitely would pick up after that.
Be at Kaiser, right?
Yeah.
Kaiser and Canal.
Which is past the reservoir.
Right.
Walk across, walk.
Right. They did it.
Oh, and was there anything else that you had?
That's it.
That's it?
I'm not gonna bring that up.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to request an executive session to consider confidential information related to the specific business strategy of an applicant for economic development assistance. And in that motion, or I would like to propose a finding both that the information is directly related to a request for economic development assistance that is provided or administered under any provision of Chapter 715, 725, or any other chapter of the Ohio Revised Code, and then involves infrastructure improvements or extension of utility services directly related to the economic development project. And then secondly, that the executive session, the unanimous quorum of the public body, that's you, determines by roll call vote that it's necessary to have the executive session to protect the interests of the applicant or possible investment of public expenditure of public funds been made in connection with the economic development project. Madam Clerk, that's Ohio Revised Code Section 121.22 G8.
So
So recite all that and we'll be good.
I was recording in my head. That way we can repeat it word for word.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion for such an executive session this evening?
So moved.
So move Mr. Engel. Second.
Second.
Mr. Mast.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Math?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
And Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
All right. After citizens' concerns and before we adjourn, we'll have an executive session. Just one?
That's all I have.
That's all you have. Mr. Leonard?
A couple things. Number one, I'll be presenting the executive session, but I couldn't do what Sean just did. So. Two things. So unfortunately, just the way the calendar falls, we did not have a meeting last week. But as you all know, the Friday preceding last Tuesday's meet day, we didn't have a meeting. Residents started receiving mailings from Energy Harbor on the new aggregation program agreement. And at this point, now a week and a half later, the phone calls have stopped coming into City Hall. Hopefully they've stopped coming to you. We fielded a lot and we tried to get some information out, I believe, on Nixle and on Facebook. Bottom line was the mailings were perfectly legitimate. We should have expected that they were going to come out. Palmer Energy, who's the consultant on the deal, apologized for not giving us a heads up as to when the mailings would go out, so we didn't know when they would be hitting people's mailboxes, but I think we've gotten over that hump. But if you have any other questions or problems and you can't answer, certainly refer people to call me anytime. The second item is that last week the federal government extended the April 15th income tax due date to mid-May, which I take to be either May 15th or the first work day that falls around May 15th. I'm not sure, I've got a calendar in front of me, but the city's due date is April 15th. We're governed by the state of Ohio, not the federal IRS. And so far, the state of Ohio has not extended the due date. I fully expect that they may very well. And if they do, we will, by default, have our due date extended. But again, the state of Ohio has not. And now that we're only about 3 weeks away from the April 15th due date, people should plan accordingly that April 15th will still be our due date. Less than until we hear something from the state, but it's getting to be the 11th hour.
Until something official changes, it is not changed.
That's right. That's it.
That's it?
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. We'll move on to the multiple legislative issues in front of us. Typically, I wait for citizens' concerns to the end of the agenda. However, on the first item up for discussion this evening, some citizens sent in letters to be read to discuss the very issue that we're going to be discussing. So whether it is pro or whether it is con, the issue that's coming before us, I think it's probably pertinent that we read the letters. These are the citizens' concerns that they wanted for us to take into consideration before the issue is discussed. So not the usual schedule of things, but I wanted to read these so at least we had them in mind.
Read the legislation first.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the expansion of the Defiance outdoor refreshment area, making certain findings and determinations and enacting regulations to the effect.
All right. And I have in front of me two letters. The one says, Dear City Council members, I am writing in support of the Dora District expansion in downtown Defiance. I believe the expansion will only increase the activity and foot traffic that will ultimately benefit the businesses. I've taken advantage of the Dora District in the past few years and feel it has been a great addition. I realize not a lot of people take advantage of this opportunity, but for those who do, like the freedom to move around from one business to another, it was a good change. I do not feel that there is extra need for security. Nothing has really changed since the time we did not have the Dora District. It has been a positive addition to the downtown area. I encourage you to consider the expansion of the Dora District in the downtown area. Sincerely, Carla Batt. And secondly, from Jen Clady, Operations Manager, King's Flooring and Furniture, Vice President, Downtown Development and Visitors Bureau. Dear City Council members, as a Defiance resident, I have an inherent interest in the community's growth, vitality, and ability to provide a good quality of life for its current and prospective citizens. To this end, I sit on the Downtown Development and Visitors Bureau Board of Directors and serve as a citizen-appointed member of the Defiance City Planning Commission. I want to see our city achieve well-suited sustainable growth that not only attracts new businesses and citizens, but increases the well-being and standard of living for the people that already call Defiance home. The expansion of the Dora District is a significant and essential piece to this puzzle. My reasons for this letter are threefold. 1, expanding and retaining jobs and employees. It's not enough just to have the infrastructure to support current and expanding business. We also need the infrastructure to support employees and their families. Quality housing and schools are necessary, but so are retail, entertainment, and leisure activities. 2, attracting and retaining young entrepreneurial talent, or in simpler terms, keeping our kids here. Many of our children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews realize that if they want their choice of job opportunities and a well-rounded, easy, accessible social life, they need to go to larger, more developed urban areas. Not only is this a personal loss to our friends and families, but it's a loss to Defiance. We are losing the vital energy, talent, and creativity inherent in people this age. And 3, riverfront development. At this time, we are underusing one of the greatest and most beautiful existing resources. As an employee of one of our downtown businesses, I can't tell you how much I enjoy seeing families or groups of friends take advantage of a sunny day or a random Tuesday to enjoy our Dora District and explore our downtown shops. Or how nice it is to see Clinton Street full of friends and families strolling, chatting on benches, and running into friends they didn't expect to see during one of the downtown events like Farmers Market or Busker Fest. These opportunities for spontaneous outings and chance interactions are things that bring a sense of community and belonging to downtown. Expanding the Dora District gives us the opportunity to attract even more businesses, events, and activities for our residents and visitors and to participate in and enjoy. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration of this letter and Dora's expansion. By reading these, I'm not endorsing one way or the other. I am, however, reading the citizens' concerns so that they're read before we actually discuss the issue. Mr. Corbett.
Since you moved citizens' concerns pertaining to this up on the agenda, I have one to share also, if you'll allow me to.
Yeah, please do.
And this is from Pat Marshall, and it says, I would be very much opposed to expanding Dora into public parks, including Kingsbury and Pontiac parks, and a couple more potential parks in the future. These are places where families and their children gather, and where their children gather with friends without adult supervision. It's no secret that where there is alcohol, there is potential for unwanted behavior. I feel this could be a threat to the safety of the children. It also might produce less than inappropriate role models for children. To me, that's a huge no. That's from Pat Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Corbett. Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just some procedural notes here. This was presented to you as like 2 companion items of legislation, and that's what you proposed that I draft, both the Dora expansion as submitted in the application by Ms. Mack, and then also the revitalization district, also submitted to the mayor by application, and then passed on to you. Right now, we're only bringing the Dora expansion legislation to you for the sole reason that we want the revitalization district to match whatever the Dora ends up being. We don't want it in two different areas. We think that would cause too much confusion. So you can look for that in the future once the dust settles with the DORA. And this ordinance basically incorporates the territory that you set forth in your motion on March 9th, as well as from the expansion application marked Exhibit A. Those are one and the same. And the section 4301.82B of the Ohio Revised Code specifically authorizes you to do so, to expand this area. And I would just remind you that council, a majority of council can at any time shrink or get rid of the DORA. You don't have to wait 5 years. If it's not working out for you, you can get rid of it. That's section 4301.82J. Now, Ms. Mack is here to answer any questions that I'm not smart enough to handle, so I will leave your questions to her.
Oh, do we have any questions for Mr. O'Donnell or Ms. Mack? Mr. Mast?
Just, it's kind of a two-part. Are there hours of operation or occupation of parks like Kingsbury and Pontiac?
Are there hours of operation?
I mean, is there
Or
a,
dawn to dusk.
Yeah, I think it is dawn to dusk.
will the DORA change any of that?
The DORA currently operates noon to midnight. So the only change that would be is that obviously if dusk would to come and there wouldn't be an event per se drawing into that area, that could absolutely be something to be discussed. That is how it is worded currently right now.
That the park provisions will be kept in place as far as not allowing people in there after dusk?
I would say unless it were changed per rule or per statement, yes, I would say so. There would be no need to change that.
Yeah, I think that would be implied. I mean, we have a lot of proprietors that are just storefronts that participate in the DORA. When they're closed, you can't go in there even with the DORA cup. That would still be trespassing. I mean,
Yeah.
we wouldn't cite you for having the DORA cup, but we'd cite you for trespassing.
Well, I just wanted to kind of allay that fear that, you know, they're gonna still have people roaming about with DORA cups.
Sure.
at midnight in the parks. I mean, that's
Mr. Hancock?
Along with our DORA discussion, the areas, are we still speaking of the same areas we had before? Have we revised those areas?
No, this would be according to both the application submitted by Ms. Mack and your motion, or one of your motions last week,
Okay, so,
or 2 weeks.
so the motion that was made last week, did we exclude some areas then?
You did not.
We did not, so we still have basically the same, excluding Kingsbury Pool, correct?
No, it's not excluding it.
That-
Doesn't-
cool, yeah.
The pool is excluded for
Correct.
the application.
Otherwise, Kingsbury's included,
Correct.
south of East Second to Hopkins and so forth, okay?
Correct.
That's what we currently have, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Nope. Mr. Engel?
You know, I've thought about this and thought about this and everything, and I just would like to make a motion to make an amendment on this to exclude Kingsbury Park, take that completely out, but leave the Triangle Park and Pontiac Park in. Pontiac Park doesn't work out, another year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, if there's too much trouble, we can skin that back. Am I right on that?
That is correct. Yes.
And then we can take it from there. But I just think Kingsbury Park, I just think there's too many kids there with the swimming pool, with the ball fields. And I'm sure you could go down there anytime and probably see what we're talking about as far as the alcohol and that. But that scares me, but I'd like to make a motion to take Kingsbury out, but keep the two other ones in.
So we have a motion to amend the ordinance in front of us to exclude Kingsbury Park, but maintain Triangle and Pontiac and the other parks. So we have a motion, do we have a second?
Before we have a second, a quick question, would that exclude the Oglaze Park that's possibly going to be a part of that? Because Kingsbury was one section, but then it was also going to be East Second Street to that Glaze section, which isn't a park yet, but hopefully is going to be a park.
Yeah, between Second and.
Yes, Hopkins.
Hopkins, yep.
So would that exclude that section too? Are you thinking Kingsbury and all of that?
Wherever it says door ends here on East Second Street, that's where I want it to stop.
Okay.
It does not go over that bridge. Maybe that better explains what I was trying to say.
So are you amending your motion for it to stop at
Right where it
the
starts,
East Second
right where it
Bridge?
stops at now.
On the
It
west
does
side.
not go across that
Okay.
bridge.
Mr. Resty?
Just for a procedural, on Mr. Engel's motion, last week or the week before, we had made a motion in which I had seconded to exclude both Pontiac and Kingsbury from the door expansion. Since that was defeated, can we now bring it back under this present motion? Or are we held to 6 months before we can bring the same issue back?
No, that 6 months, Mr. Uresti, would be after a motion to adopt. If it were to fail, then you couldn't bring back another door expansion for 6 months. So that's only covered under the motion to adopt under our rules.
Okay, so this, okay, all right, that's all I needed.
Yeah, essentially it was a motion to amend, the motion to amend failed, it never got to a motion to adopt. So we have a motion to amend the ordinance in front of us to exclude the Kingsbury Park or stopping the expansion east on the west side of the Second Street Bridge. Do we have a second to this motion to amend?
I'll second it.
Second, Mrs. Crutch.
Mr. Hancock,
No.
Mr. Rusty,
No.
Mr. Mast,
Yes.
Mr. Waxler,
No.
Mrs. Crutch,
Yes.
Mr. Engel,
Yes.
Mr. Corbett.
No.
Okay,
1, 2, 3, 4, you got 4 no's.
4 noes, it will not be amended.
So we have to do something with the bill.
Right, so in front of us is still an ordinance. What are council's wishes? Mr. Resty?
My comment to the ordinance is that, in my opinion, alcohol parks and children shouldn't mix. So I'm basically opposed to this legislation. And if we could, I'd like to see this go to 3 readings.
Motion to let it lie for a second reading.
So, motion to let live for second reading.
Second.
Second, Mr. Resty?
Just 1 second, please.
You're fine.
Mr. Corbett,
Yes.
Mr. Hancock,
Yes.
Mr. Rusty,
Yes.
Mr. Mast,
Yes.
Mr. Waxler,
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch,
Yes.
and Mr. Engel.
Yes.
All right. We will let this motion lie and
Reading next week.
second reading next week. Exactly.
Okay. First reading, an ordinance amending ordinance numbers 8208 and 8279 by approving a second change order to an engineering service contract and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Leonard?
I'll take this. Thank you, Mr. President. As part of our IWIP and part of our mandate from EPA, we at one time hired the services of a company called MNet, now known as Xylem. They actually gave us a quote to do some modeling, and when I talk about modeling, what that means is that we're actually putting sensors in the sewers and trying to measure flow. And it's all part of our overall strategy, because what we try to do in this IWIP and in this mandate is we try to dry out our system. So we want to know where the flows are coming from. We want to make sure that we try to alleviate as much rainfall or as much infiltration, as much flow as we possibly can. That way we're not dispersing it out to the rivers, which is a no-no in terms of the EPA. What we've done in order to do the modeling is the company that we used to deal with, as I said, was MNET, now Xylem. We've had some maybe differences with them, and they've gotten new personnel, and I think it's been a problem of our team actually working with them. I think that they gave us a quote that was rather high. They came down on that quote, but we feel more comfortable with actually doing the modeling through Strand and some of his people that he has on his staff. We feel it's a better fit for us, and as part of what we would like to do is, in order to do this modeling, we want Strand to do the modeling for us at this point on this subject matter. And we used to have a separate company to do that. We feel it's going to be better suited for Strand to do that. And in terms of this piece of legislation, this will cost us $55,000 to do that. But through that, we'll get some really good data and information on our system and our flows of our system. So we would encourage council to make an amendment to our previous contract with Strand. And what we're asking to do is spend the money on the modeling with them, because we believe that it's a better fit, and I think we can get better information at this point. Since the old company that we used to use was bought out, and now we're dealing with new people, and some of those people have left.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Waxler?
What was the cost of the other company compared to this one?
The original cost was $157,000, okay? Then what they did is they knocked it down to $30,000. And it was kind of amazing how we went from one figure all the way down to this figure, and we didn't really feel comfortable because we felt that by signing up for the lower cost that we were probably going to be filled with change orders. So our team, which was the engineer and the wastewater superintendent, felt more comfortable with going with a number that we felt was probably more accurate. So that's why, you know, at one time it was 157, they cut it down to 30, and we just didn't have confidence that we were going to get what we paid for. And we believed that we might get bumped up with some change orders.
But wasn't it like 2 years ago, didn't we do this? So we was monitoring all this? I thought we did this a couple of years ago.
We did.
Okay.
And what we're doing is by separating the system out and making changes in the system, we're going to move those sensors to a different location and then seeing what's happening there. So now we're going to model that, okay? So just where we've done a lot of separation, like around our first group work was like 1 through 6, which is really down by Fort Street and Jefferson and coming all the way to Wayne and up to Williams. Those sensors will be moved and we'll be modeling elsewhere, south of town. We have a lot of inflow out by Tarrawanda and those areas now. So
when they move into this next location, what's going to happen when they're done there? Does this include just moving them wherever they need to be moved?
This is probably going to be the tail end of the modeling, because we can dry out the system, and what you try to do is get what's called 85% capture of your system. We want to dry it out as much as we possibly can, and we're pretty close to 85% capture right now. So this should be like the finishing touches on that.
And how long do they run this
This will probably, I think the other one ran like, it would be 18 months, and we're required to report those numbers to EPA. This will probably be an extended amount of time as well, close to that time, so we can get the information and then dry the system out and then make better decisions with just what we're going to do. For example, one of the things that we've talked a lot about has been like the Kingsbury pump station. What you're getting right now is you're getting all that flow from the south and from the west. Everything goes to that Kingsbury pump station. From the north, it comes to the Kingsbury pump station. We want to dry that system out enough where we're not taxing the Kingsbury pump station that much. And you can look in the future where we're going to modify that pump station, but we don't want to build it to a large capacity because we want to cut the flows down. So that's going to save us money on that as well. So in essence, the strategy is drying out the system, getting the flows reduced as much as we possibly can, and doing it through sensor technology and actually real-time monitoring.
I just know it's something we did a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
so
we did.
Mr. Hancock?
Mr. Waxler asked one of the questions that I had. Also, we budgeted for 157. It came back, but we're at 55. I believe this was part of our 21 budget, is that correct?
There's money budgeted in the 21 budget for Strand. This modeling, even at the 157, nothing of that magnitude was budgeted, no.
Okay.
This is a change order that's happened since the budget was passed. So it'd be an additional expense out of the sewer fund that has not been budgeted yet, but it can cover.
Okay, and basically we went from 157 to 55. We still have 100 available. Would that be,
No.
am I saying that correctly?
No, they gave us a quote of 157. We didn't.
Oh, it wasn't in the budget at the 157. Okay.
Right, that was
Okay.
their original quote of the company.
Gotcha.
Okay, and we said, no, that's way too high.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Waxler?
No further questions, no spending call.
If we have no other questions, a motion to suspend and call Mr. Waxler.
Second.
Mr. Corbett?
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes,
And Mr. Hancock?
motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes,
And Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
And this ordinance is adopted.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the acquisition of real property on West River Drive.
Mr. President, last year, the mayor was approached by a local realtor about 4 parcels along the north bank of the Maumee River that were becoming available for sale. And these parcels are just west of the Purple Heart Bridge. And they're also labeled exhibits A through D in your packet of materials.
You want me to pull that up?
Yeah, that's okay. I think they all have them. But, the city owns some of the property surrounding the parcels. In fact, all the way to the west to the pump station over by the railroad bridge. And we believe that it's in the city's interest to go ahead and acquire these 4 parcels to make the city's ownership along the riverbank continuous. That would enable any further riverfront, parkland, trail development, what have you. The offering price is $20,000. The city would like to, or proposes to secure that now because the price will go up when we have a project. I can almost assure you of that.
And we will own from this clear to the pump station then, right? From the bridge to the pump station once we own this.
Yes, sir. There are 3 parcels tucked along the riverbank where the railroad bridge crosses that we do not own, but we own behind that where the pump station is.
Mr. Rusty?
No other questions, we'll suspend and call.
We have no other questions. Motion, Mr. Rusty. Second, Mrs. Crutch.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
yes,
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
And we have a motion.
Motion adopt.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Engel.
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
yes,
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
And Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
This ordinance is also adopted.
An ordinance authorizing the acquisition of real property on Domersville Road.
Mr. Leonard?
Thank Thank you, Mr. President. I'm surprised this says Domersville. I mean,
Well, that's the address on the property card,
Okay.
I think because it extends all the way out to two eighty-one.
I agree. I mean, I was a little taken back by it, but this is actually property that is along Old 424. It's right off of Burning Tree, and if you can go straight east from there to the bridge, and maybe that's why it's labeled that way. But this is actually a grant program, and this program will allow us property acquisition of that land. And the reason that we're so much interested in that land is that we want to create a wetlands. And part of our overall strategy for our IWIP, this sort of assists us in our IWIP as well. And the whole concept and scope of this project is much bigger than just the property acquisition, because there also is available grant monies to do engineering design and actually building a wetlands in this area. And I believe in talking with our staff member, that amounts somewhere around $900,000. So this is for the property acquisition of the land. There's further grant money, and all this is paid for by the grant money. And if we don't get the grant money, we're not going to buy the property. I mean, that's the whole intent behind the property acquisition. And this first piece of legislation that you see tonight is actually acquiring the property and acquiring it to the levels that you see on the ordinance. And further after that, there's additional programming that becomes available to us that we can apply for. And what the first piece that we want to make sure is that we have authorization to buy it, but we're not going to buy that piece of property unless we can get this paid for with H2 Ohio funds. And again, if you think about what the city's trying to do, if you've been out to the reservoir site and that back field, you'll see some work being done there where they're actually grading the property to the degree where they're actually measuring it going into the property and coming out of the property back into the creek. And the idea is to see if there's nutrient reduction and how much reduction we're getting from actually using these green infrastructure concepts to filter out the water. We would want to do the same thing with this property. And we believe that we can get it paid for fully with grant money. And that's why we're interested in doing it. And if you think about it, building a green infrastructure piece like that, it just enhances the community. And it's a concept that I think they're really pushing at the state of Ohio, and they're pushing federally. And it's our opinion that we should take this opportunity to take advantage of those concepts, because I think it fits in with what we're trying to do. And we will do some further analysis if we're successful in securing grant monies to measure the impact of water going into that site and also leaving it. So we want to see what the data shows us. We believe it's much more effective certainly within our mandate of our separating our sewers, because we believe that that's about 1% of the problem. And when you look at this green infrastructure concept, we believe it's a higher impact with the money, and we can really lend itself to better water quality principles. And we believe that's exactly where we're trying to push this city to. So not a lot of cities are doing these things. Some of them are, some of the bigger cities are. But I think if you look at our location and the confluence of the rivers and our location of where we sit with 6 different watersheds, it's pretty strategic. And I think that by adopting the green infrastructure, I think it'll pay off in the future. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Mr. Rusty?
I think this is money well spent, especially since it's free.
Yeah.
And there are no other questions. Most of the spending call.
We have no other questions. A motion to suspend and call. Mr. Waxler? Second.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Hancock, second. Mr. Mast.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
And Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
This ordinance is adopted.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to contract for the resurfacing of Bronson Park, Kingsbury Park, and Riverside Cemetery and declare an emergency.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. President. These two parks, as well as our cemetery, are due for repaving, resurfacing, and that includes sidewalk and some curb replacements. We're the lowest and best jurisdiction, which means we get to choose among the lowest bidders, and we get to compare the bidders up against each other. And that lowest and best bid came from Ward Construction out of Leipzig, Ohio. Ohio. It's Leipzig everywhere else in the world, but we know better, so it's Leipzig. The emergency request is due to section 153.12A Ohio Revised Code. Basically, you have to award a construction contract within 60 days of opening bids, or you got to rebid the whole project. We don't want to do that, so it's an emergency request.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard?
I would just add that the bids came in at the $225,000 and the 2021 budget included $275,000 for these projects. So it came in $50,000 below what we'd budgeted, so that's
We have any-
for the land on, help us to pay for the $20,000 land on West River.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. O'Donnell?
No further questions. Motion to suspend the call.
Motion to suspend and call Mrs. Crutch. Second, Mr. Corbett.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
You threw me off. Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
And Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
And do we have a motion to adopt?
Motion is done.
Mr. Mast. Second, Mr. Waxler.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
And Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
This ordinance is also adopted.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing a contract for the 2021 street resurfacing program and declaring an emergency.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Council may recall around this time last year, we didn't really know what was happening in the world and with some of the things going on in the world. So we put some of our paving projects on hold, but not all. We did some paving. And as we come out of the pandemic, the goal is to accelerate back into those projects. And so you should have a complete list of the desired repaving projects in your inbox or in your Dropbox. And this was shared with you around budget time last year as well. Gherkin Paving submitted the lowest and best bid. The base bid was $790,313.12, and then they submitted an alternate bid to bring the of 5 additional streets, brought the total up to $1,121,494.82, and that's a bargain. So passage would include both the base bid, alternate bids, and that would help us bring our street resurfacing and reconstruction priorities back up to speed and ready to take on 2022. And your constituents would get to enjoy a summer of road construction projects.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard?
Sorry. I'd like to make a budgetary note on this one as well. The 2021 budget originally included $853,000 for this exact list of roads. A little over $600,000 from the capital improvements line, $250,000 from the streets budget from our additional gas tax. Just want to be clear that the $1.1 million is the exact same list of roads that we had in the budget for $853. There were some features of a few of these roads that were not tabulated in the original estimates when the budget was put together. And So I just wanted to be clear on two things. One, all the roads that were in the 2021 budget will be paved for this 1.1 million. It is more than we had budgeted, but as you are all well aware, we have another significant amount of federal stimulus dollars coming our way. And while the rules are being written as we speak as to how this money can be used, we're confident, one, that the allowed usages by the federal government will be more broad, even more broad than what we had with the first sets of CARES Act money. And one way or another, we believe we'll be able to use that money for some capital projects. And this would be one. We're a little ahead of ourselves in appropriating the dollars we haven't received yet, or authorizing the dollars we haven't received yet, but we are certain to receive it.
Thank you. Mr. Corbett?
This is probably a question that has already been answered one way or the other, but we're already 1.2 million, give or take, ahead of what our carryover was projected. So the money's already there for this extra cost there, regardless of what the federal government does now.
Technically speaking, you're correct.
Has anybody considered adding to our paving program and taking advantage of the time frame we're in now so people can see the tax dollars they spent outside their kitchen window? Has that been considered yet? Because we are behind, even though we're doing a lot this year, there's still many more to go.
I think that within the next couple of weeks, we'll probably be coming to council to talk about some other ideas for the money, and paving and street work will certainly be a part of that conversation. It's not a part of this contract.
Thank you.
And I was gonna follow along with Mr. Corbett as well, that we're seeing these new paving and restructuring, considering sidewalks as well. I think is a case, because we've had quite a bit of discussion, and if the funds are available, we should consider that as well, especially in particular areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from or questions from council? Mr. Corbett?
No further questions. Motion to suspend and call.
We have a motion to suspend and call. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Hancock.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Ingo?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
And Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
And do we have a motion to adopt?
Motion to adopt?
Mrs. Crutch, second.
Second.
Mr. Mast.
Mr. Ingo?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
And Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
And finally, this ordinance is also adopted.
Done.
All right, we read some letters pertaining to the first item for legislation today. Did council have any other letters or comments from the public to share during citizens' concerns? Mr. Rusty?
I just have a question on the legislation that we just passed. Again, dealing with the monies that we potentially could get in and the amounts of monies and projects. Maybe a recommendation that if there is a good portion of monies that are to come in, that maybe we should have maybe a streets and sidewalks meeting where we can sit down and basically talk about this versus doing it with legislation and then, trying to refashion it that way.
Sure.
Talk about it ahead of time, and I think it might get a lot of the concerns that I have also in talking about sidewalks as Mr. Hancock has, and
Yeah.
Also the amounts of streets that we need to get, that we have maybe not, might not have touched before or something.
Right, no, that's a great idea. I know that we have an internal meeting with the administration and staff to talk about possible uses for this money, and to carry that into a study session or something, or a committee meeting with the council, I think is a great idea as well. We are probably up to a couple of months before we'll receive this money. I think I read last week, it's about 60 days before we'll receive it. They literally are still working out the details in the allocation and the allowable uses for the funds. We have received an estimate of what we are to receive, but subject to tweaking, so we'll see. But that's a great idea, and I think it is such a large amount of money, Mr. Uresti, that we will definitely want to have discussions, and we won't just bringing you legislation to pass.
Yeah, that would be great, to just make it as a committee as a whole, that
Yeah.
way it's not specified to, to just the committee, that basically it involves everybody on council.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Uresti. Without any other citizens' concerns, we can stand up, stretch our legs for a few minutes, and then shortly enter executive session.